Yo, 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 what's that word? This is Third 12 Inning Podcast. I'm your host, Brodrick. Big episode 28. Go check out episode 27 with the artist known as RIP, represent Inner Passion of XNVIX, and John Georges, author, comic book writer, aspiring writer of Three Geeks and a Podcast. Go check out their content. They pump out great stuff all the time. Without further ado, we about to knock it out the park. This episode is going to be NBA centric. A lot of stuff's been happening in association, which we ain't got a chance to chat it up and talk it up about. Of course, we're going to hit on some key points of the 2023 NBA draft, the situation with Dame in Portland, of course the Bradley Beal trade, and one of my low-key favorite ones, the Celtics Porzingis for Marcus Smart trade along with Tyus Jones. We're going to hit on all those points. So the first thing we're going to do is the NBA draft. I broke it down from, in my opinion, who had the best class, the top 5 best classes as far as value from where they were picking at and the prospect they got overall. In no particular order, we're going to start off with the Rockets. And to me, they probably had my favorite draft class, of course. At number 4 overall, they picked up Amen Thompson. How I did this is I looked at film of them and I wrote down stuff that caught my eye, did a little scouting report. Excuse me. So the first thing that happened when I saw Amen, I wrote literally, don't jump with him. Dude made the game look so effortless and easy. I think he can tighten up his handle some. And I did have pro comps for all these players. Elite end-to-end quickness. He's an athlete. They talked about him throughout the year. As soon as he comes into the league, being a top 10 athlete in the league, I think his film verifies that. The game looks extremely easy for this kid. For pro comparisons, at first I wrote Lonnie Walker. Now, I could see how that could come back and people could try to get on me about that, but I think that's more of a floor for Amen Thompson, Lonnie Walker. For a ceiling, I had Russell Westbrook. Really like this game. If he can tighten up on the defensive end, and of course Russell has a very good, or had a very good in-between game from the mid-range, and I think he's going to be good, but he's a really good playmaker, and he's going to effortlessly get to the rim and play make for his teammate. I like what I've seen from him a lot. Next, they picked up Cam Whitmore, who they were speculating to be actually targeting at the number 4 pick. He's a strong finisher in the paint, and he has great form on his three-point shot. I think he's going to be a very good scorer in the league. For his pro comp, I actually had Anthony Edwards. Now, we got to remember, there's a reason Anthony Edwards went number 1 overall. He had the playmaking and the accuracy and volume from 3 that I don't see from Cam, but I see the strong finishing ability, attacking the rim, and the three-point form that could turn him into a very good three-point shooter. I like the Anthony Edwards comparison. He actually had more total turnovers in college than he did assists. So again, the playmaking isn't there, but there's a reason he slid to 20 instead of being number 1. But he has the athleticism and the want to finish in the paint, and the creativity and explosiveness to have a high ceiling in the NBA. So that was our first team, the Rockets. Next, we're going to talk about the Lakers, the Lake Show. So I really like them. They picked up Jalen Hood-Schifino, guard from Indiana. Great positional size as a 6'5" point guard, and he's a great decision maker. I really like watching his game. Very smooth, isn't overly explosive, but is ultimately very creative on the floor. Reminded me a lot of Lonzo Ball at UCLA. Of course, Lonzo, higher level playmaker than this kid so far, but Lonzo also was playing with more talent. And I think this kid ultimately has a higher ceiling in the NBA than he does in college because of the athletes he's going to have running beside him. He's also a great decision maker. Didn't see many egregious turnovers. More like late shot clock situations, have to make a play, which he's going to face a lot in the NBA, but ultimately you got to keep in mind that he's going to be counted on as more of a secondary playmaker to LeBron James and Anthony Davis when he's on the floor. I also wanted to say this too about Lonzo Ball too. He's going to be out for the 2023-2024 season. Unfortunately, there's whispers that he might never even play again. That's really sad for a player that came in so hyped with all the marketability and ultimately got to live out his dream. And I just want to say from Third 12 Inning Podcast to you, Lonzo, we hope you make it back healthy and have a productive NBA career. Next, the Lakers picked up Maxwell Lewis. In the beginning of the season, I watched this kid. I was like, he might potentially be a lottery pick in the future. He didn't tight up his handles like I thought he was, but he is a pure scorer. He's a confident shot taker. Now, people might say, of course, every time you take a shot, you're going to think you're going to make it. That's not true. A lot of people, I say even most people, when they shoot the ball, you have an idea, okay, this might go in or this and that. Like, it's not like the Kobe situation. Like, every shot, I believe I'm going to make it. And I think, I'm not saying this kid is Kobe, but he has the confidence to shoot the ball, especially playing for a team like Pepperdine where smaller conference, he was counted on and relied on to take and make those shots. Not as much in the league, but I do think he has microwave scorer potential. That's why I said his pro comp was Jordan Clarkson. I did like that he showed a good in-between game, but he also had a good post-up game. So we're going to see how that goes in the league because he has a thinner frame and maybe that can work in the smaller conferences in college. And, you know, Jordan Clarkson doesn't really show much of a post-up game. But again, I think that's just a comparison because if that part of his game is out, he can expand more on ball handling and shot taking and shot making. Next, we had the Trailblazers. We're going to talk about them a lot. Remember that. Trailblazers, they picked up Scoot Henderson at number 3, which is maybe a spot below where we thought he was going to go. I digress. So watching Scoot, I saw that he was a creative, acrobatic finisher. He was great in the pick and roll. I thought he had very good balance whenever he came out of those pick and rolls. Seemed to look to shoot more than I thought he would before. But that's not a negative. He's aggressive coming off the pick and roll as a scorer. And I think they'll certainly appreciate that. But again, we're going to talk about the Blazers a little bit more later on for pro comps for Scoot Henderson. At first, I put Eric Bledsoe, Kentucky guard, 2010 draft. I think pick number 18, very athletic. Remember, they used to call him Mini LeBron. Playing for Shanghai right now, but I digress. Athletic guard, good in the pick and roll. Ultimately, was a really good defender. Made a couple all-star teams where people think I'm trying to be disrespectful. I'm not. And again, just like a men, I put Eric Bledsoe as a floor, an all-star caliber guard as a floor who made a lot of money in the league. You can't beat it. As a ceiling, I put Baron Davis, elite guard back in the day, very explosive. Playmaker, doesn't have the girth of Baron Davis nor the post-up game as it's kind of faded away as time has went on, but explosiveness in decision making, I think he's right there with Baron Davis, with BD, the great BD, and so that's where I think his ceiling lies. The Trailblazers also picked up Chris Murray. It's going to be funny what I did for the pro comparison. But watching this film, I think he's a good shooter, has great form on his shot. I wasn't overly hungry or took bad shots, made sure it was a great shot, which is going to work out good for the Trailblazers and disciplined coach Chauncey Billups. He had excellent body control in the paint. You can tell he got used to playing power forward. And he also picked up some tips from his pro comparison, well, in my opinion, with his brother, Keegan Murray. I think they're going to have a very similar role in the league. Keegan had a great rookie year. I'm not sure if Chris is going to have that same type of impact because I'm not sure the opportunities are going to be there. But I think they have similar potential as that forward, 3-and-D forward, and we'll see how that goes. Lastly, for the Blazers was Rayan Rupert, a French prospect who played for the New Zealand Breakers of the Australian League. He had extremely long arms. First thing I saw, great length as a prospect, 3-and-D wing potential. And they're going to need that with Jeremy Grant entering unrestricted free agency. And we got to see how that plays out and everything that's going to go with that. We're going to talk about that a little bit more again later on. Y'all go check that out. quick side note, y'all go look at Hattie's collection and things of that nature. We got a new line that we're going to drop, Melancholy. Check out my other videos, 12 Inning Podcast. Forgive me, the cat going crazy, excuse me. But also, so a pro player comparison that I saw from him was Lou Dort. Lou Dort doesn't have as long arms as Rupert has, but he is a very disruptive defender. I like that the first couple highlights on his film were steals and getting out to the open floor, finishing strong on the break. He has a couple ball handling clips on his highlights, but I don't think that's going to be in his role in the league because they aren't as tight as you want them from a guard prospect who you expect to create shots for himself and for his teammate. But Lou Dort doesn't do that. Obviously, he has Josh Giddey, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and I believe the guard that came from Florida last year. He has a lot of guards on his team that set him up, but he can do what he does in isolation sometimes. And ultimately, it's about making that money, and Lou Dort has done that in the NBA. And this kid, if he hits his ceiling, in my opinion, can get to that point. Next, we had the New Orleans Pelicans, who actually only had one pick, and that was Jordan Hawkins, my favorite shooter in the draft. Excellent, excellent. Literally 14 minutes of highlights in the NCAA tournament are just catch and shoot threes. Gotta love it. You gotta appreciate when a person knows like how they're gonna make their bread, what's gonna butter it. He knew what it was before he came into the league. You could tell he practiced a lot on coming off of screens, pin downs, things of that nature to shoot the three-point shot. And if that sounds familiar, his pro comparison for me was J.J. Redick, an NCAA championship, Mr. Hawkins. I think he's going to do really well in between C.J. McCollum, Brandon Ingram, and Zion Williamson. Coming off the screens, we see what Coach Willie Green is going to implement there. But I'm excited about him. He was one of my favorite picks in the draft. I was hoping he would fall to the Lakers because he does a lot of things to open up the floor, and ultimately that's what they need with the playmakers that they have. But I digress. The Pelicans also have good playmakers in Brandon Ingram. I don't think people appreciate how much playmaking he actually does for that team, and C.J. McCollum when he's cast in his lead guard role as he has been since he got to the Pelicans. I think they're going to open up a lot of opportunities for this kid, and I think he's going to knock him down. He's played in high-pressure environments, been in college for a little while, and I'm very excited about that pick. Next, we had the #1 overall pick holders, and that was the San Antonio Spurs, who picked up Victor Wembanyama. Now, watching him, obviously he's an excellent prospect. Watching him, I really like his footwork, his body control, and he will need to add weight. I really like that he was showing off his handles, his ball control. Again, great footwork in the paint. You got to question the level of competition, but he was dominant against his competition like any great prospect is supposed to be. Now he's getting a lot of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Anthony Davis hype around him, and maybe AD was a closer pro comp. Now that I think about it, actually leading that league in blocks, but I actually put down somebody who had a more thinner frame like him, also a prospect of European descent, and that was Kristaps Porzingis, who we're going to talk about later again. I just saw a lot of those create your own shot from the perimeter, from the block, from the in-between game, the mid-post area, just like Porzingis. Obviously, we hope that he don't have the same injury history as Porzingis has had, that all those nick-ups and things of that nature. Defensively, he has a lot of blocks, but again, a lot of times he's the biggest player on the court, extremely long arms. Hopefully he's in better position, but we thought that Kristaps was going to be a dominant defender. Hasn't turned out that way. Kristaps is a good defender with the potential to be great, especially with this new trade and a better system for him to be in, maybe to accentuate those skills on the defensive end. But Wembanyama, obviously, we know he gets to be coached by, in my opinion, the greatest coach in NBA history, Greg Popovich, and I think this was a solid pick. Their second round pick I really liked too, and that was City Sesko. Really like this pick for the Spurs. He's an explosive athlete, above average vision from the forward position. Greg Popovich is really going to love this pick. I really love this pick. Just if you go watch his film, explosive in the open court, known for the no-look dime. Didn't have many three-point attempts or any really shot attempts outside of the paint in his clips. But the ones he did, it shows he has solid form on him, could be better. But again, he's going to the obvious, well, not obviously, arguably the best coaching staff in the league for the Spurs. He's going to have great development. I'm really excited to see what this kid is going to do and if he's going to get minutes behind Jeremy Sochan and forgot his name, the other Keldon Johnson, the other forward for the Spurs. I think those are two players that he can develop behind and ultimately learn a lot from Keldon. And I think this was a great pickup in the second round for the Spurs, especially coming from that young G League program, overtime elite. So, moving on from the NBA draft, we're going to talk about Dame and his situation in Portland. First, I want to talk about a little bit about NBA contracts and why maybe Dame hasn't requested a trade yet. Now, the thing about it is, what people got to understand, in the last CBA got signed, it incentivized players to stay in the town that drafted them long term by offering, the 5th year on the contract, and really the can't turn down money in that last year of the contract, almost 75 to 100 million more just for that 1 year in the last year. So it really incentivizes star players to stay with the team that drafted them, because we know there was a lot of superstar movement going on in the 2010s decade. And so far, it's working. I don't think people realize superstars like Dame, Steph, they've never been free agents before. Never. And we might realistically grow up in the NBA where Zion Williamson, Ja Morant, Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, player like that never reach free agency. Sure, they'll move. Well, I hope they don't. You know what I'm saying? I kind of vibe with the whole stand with your team thing now and leading to a championship. And I think the NBA likes that too, especially with the record high viewership this year. But it's going to incentivize those players to stay long term. And Dame has been a beneficiary of that, obviously. Nobody ever really talks about it, but Dame has made hundreds of $millions in Portland, more than could have made anywhere else. He's comfortable there. I think his family is comfortable there. It's not extremely far from his hometown of Oakland, California. So I think he really enjoys being there, and he's really serious about it. Winning a championship there. He's the all-time leading point scorer for that franchise, arguably the greatest player in franchise history. And that argument is Bill Walton, Clyde Drexler, and things of that nature. But Dame is up there as well. He's led his team to a Western Conference Finals. Obviously, he hasn't had much playoff success, and that's where we go into things like what are the Blazers' direction, or what is the Blazers' direction? So far, we've seen them sign Anthony Simons to $100 million, draft Shaedon Sharpe, I believe at number 6 or 7 last year in the 2022 NBA draft, another explosive guard, and also just picked up Scoot in this draft. That's one ball for 4 players that need the ball in their hand, along with the free agency of Jeremy Grant, who came to the Trailblazers from the Detroit Pistons because he wanted a larger role. He wanted more of a say-so on the offense, and they don't have to. But Joseph Nurkic, most of his value comes on the offensive end as a center. So it's an offensive-oriented roster, and you just gotta wonder how that can work. It almost seems impossible with all the minutes you have to go out, because you're not shrinking Dame's minutes if you keep him. So are you going to hinder the development of Anthony Simons or Shaedon Sharpe, who you just picked up? To me, it makes all the sense at this point to get what you can from Dame. You already crushed this draft with Chris Murray, Rupert, and Scoot Henderson. And you've been developing your young talent in Anthony Simons and Shaedon Sharpe, and I think it's time to give those keys to those guys. Even consider letting Jeremy Grant walk trading Yusuf Nurkic, and finally sending Dame to a place that he's comfortable. He wants an opportunity to win. I get it, the loyalty thing. I understand it. I really do understand it. But sometimes if you're going on the blogs and you're going on the internet and doing interviews and you're talking about what's important to you, and that's winning, and we see the direction that your franchise is taking on a low key, sometimes you got to make that decision for yourself. Players like Jimmy Butler made that decision, and it's worked out for him to an extent, making 2 NBA Finals and Eastern Conference Finals, and ultimately almost making 3 NBA Finals if he could have sunk that 3 last year in the 2022 playoffs. But I digress. Speaking of the Miami Heat, and the last point on the Blazers, should Dame request a trade in Miami? I think he should fit right into that Heat culture. You know, they like their guys in shape. He's in shape. Really space the floor out from the three-point line. Want them help them out on the defensive end. Already a competitive team, but he's a feisty, competitive player. Has a secondary playmaker in Jimmy Butler, so the playmaking isn't all on him. Can focus more on a side of Dame that we haven't seen as much, and that's off the ball. Dame coming off screens, pin downs. We know Spo, who's the best coach currently in the league, what he does as far as putting his players in a position to exceed. We might see more of Dame's game and possibly extend his career more, not have to carry such a high offensive burden. Dame is a great, not Dame, but yes, Dame, but Bam Adebayo is also the trigger man for the Miami Heat. Dame could be used more as a cutter, run pick and roll with Bam Adebayo for that sweet pick and pop, or the pick and roll game going all the way to the basket. Both of them finished at the basket at an elite level. And unlike Nurkic in Portland, Bam is a great defensive player. So you get past Dame. If you get past Dame, Bam be there on the rotation. And we know Miami always has some undrafted or some second-round role players that play up to massive potentials and really help them out in the playoffs. And they're going to need that. And with Dame, do they have a chance to win a championship? I think with them obviously going to the finals 2 of the last 4 years and almost getting there for a 3rd year with a player of Dame's caliber, I understand if Miami were to take the swing and say, hey, we can do this, we can win. And honestly, I give them a chance to win the championship. And I hate to say that, because if you watch my last episode again, you know I'm not a huge Miami Heat supporter, but I give them a chance to win the NBA championship. So ultimately, it works for all parties. With Miami wanting to win and Dame wanting to win, and he already got his bag, I think it's a respectable move. Next, we're going to move on to the Bradley Beal trade. So, give a little bit of the trade details. The Suns got Bradley Beal, Jordan Godwin, and Isaiah Todd. The Wizards got Chris Paul, Landry Shamet. Second-round picks from the Suns in 2024, 25, 26, 27, and 2030. And they got first-round pick swaps from the Suns in 2024, 2026, 28, and I believe 2030. They got first-round pick swaps from the Phoenix Suns. And a secondary trade we're going to talk about a little bit was, well, we'll say that for later. Now, the Bradley Beal trade. So, first off, you know, Kevin Durant, again, you know, he going the super team route with Devin Booker, Bradley Beal. I think people underrate them both as passers as far as those 2 guards, Devin Booker and Bradley Beal. Both of them average over 5 assists a game. They're both good playmakers. And as we know, when you add more offensive talent, it takes pressure off you. I don't think it necessarily helps them in the department of they couldn't stop Jokic. Nobody could last year in the playoffs. I think it's a sneaky good move that they kept DeAndre and hired Frank Vogel. I think that's going to be the player that benefits the most from a Frank Vogel coach team, DeAndre Ayton, if he submits to his role as on this team, which isn't going to be offensive scoring hub, which I believe he could ultimately be. And I can't believe that that the Wizards didn't at least take a chance on that, but I digress. He's going to be an excellent defensive big, as he has been. Morale is back with Monty no longer being there. Was Frank the right coach? We'll have to see. I don't think he's going to let people walk over him. Seems like a player coach. We have to see how creative their offense is going to be and who he hires on that staff to organize the offense. As we know, Frank is going to focus a huge amount of time and effort on the defensive end. Kind of weird strategy going out when your three best players are mega offensive stars, but we'll see how it goes, and we got to see what the Phoenix Suns do about their depth. Ultimately, I think it was a good trade. Do I believe it's a championship trade? I'm not sure. If you had to ask me now, I say no. I don't think they have enough defense and depth, which we've seen rule the playoffs this year, especially when you see something like an 8 seed go to the NBA Finals, and they overwhelm people with their depth and grit and their resilience and their execution overall. And the Nuggets, the championship team, I think he raises his game to a top 5 point guard level. Not Devin Booker, Jamal Murray in the NBA playoffs. But in the regular season, for more of the time, we're not thinking of him as a top 5 NBA point guard, even though he has that ability in the playoffs. Jokic, obviously the best player in the NBA. But the thing that got them over the hump was the overwhelming amount of depth. They were getting key, critical contributions for players like Bruce Brown, the OG Jeff Green, Christian Braun, a rookie. Michael Porter Jr., he kind of struggled in the NBA Finals, but he helped lead them there with his play before that in the playoffs. And also Aaron Gordon had a monster playoff, guarding the likes of LeBron James, Kevin Durant for the Suns, Karl Anthony Towns, and a host of other players when he got there, Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler. So we're going to see what their depth look like, and we're going to see how this 3-star model looks going forward. Now for the Wizards, they picked up Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, some second-round picks and some pick swaps from the Suns, and obviously those 2028 and 2030 ones are going to be extremely valuable, as maybe by that time Kevin Durant is retired from the NBA, Devin Booker's a little older, and all 3 of those stars are injury-prone. We got to see what that culminates in. Hopefully there are no injuries, but we know that injuries are part of the game, any sport, part of life. So we got to see what comes with that. Now, the reason that I said we got to wait for later is that Wizards ultimately flipped Chris Paul to the Golden State Warriors for Jordan Poole, a protected first in 2030, top 4 protected, and a 2027 second-round pick. Now, I don't get this from the Warriors' perspective. They play a free-flowing style of basketball, really focus on passing the ball. Everybody gets a hand in touching the ball. We know Steph has it a ton as far as catching it and moving it, and Draymond is the trigger man there. I don't see how adding Chris Paul, the point guard, but ultimately a ball-dominant point guard to the team helps them out. Like, you hope that you see the Chris Paul from the Rockets, but at the same time, it was more of James doing this thing, and then when he had to take a rest, or when he was rarely on the bench, but when he was on the bench, Chris Paul was just being Chris Paul. You know, we know Chris Paul is a deadly, also he's a deadly mid-range scorer. Not really the Warriors' forte. Maybe they help him out in the playoffs. Chris Paul isn't the defender he once was. And his contract was the biggest thing, $30 million. We know the Warriors were already having trouble as far as getting under trying to avoid that second tax apron. When you have Andrew Wiggins up for an extension, Klay Thompson up for an extension, obviously Steph has a huge contract. And we were talking about members of that core even before Chris Paul got there. One of them was probably more than likely going to have to be expendable, because the owner was talking about he didn't want to pay the $500 million that it will ultimately take to keep this roster together. So that's another thing that I don't think people were paying attention to. Keep an eye out for if the Warriors trade one of those core pieces. Hopefully Klay Thompson to the Lakers. But keep an eye out if they trade one of those pieces to ultimately in a cost-cutting move. We got to see how it goes. And it was also a signal that they're choosing the older timeline and they're going all in when you trade Jordan Poole, who was You know what's funny? I talked with a good friend of mine about this recently. Before that punch from Draymond, Jordan Poole was low key